Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible, unlikely success stories in human history. We're going to trace the journey of a boy who was raised in just crushing poverty, but who ultimately birthed the electromagnetic age we're living in right now. Before this guy came along, electricity was basically a mysterious parlor trick. After him, it became the controllable generative force that runs literally our entire modern civilization. So let's explore the life, the discoveries, and the massive legacy of Michael Faraday.
All right, let's kick things off with a staggering number: 0. That is the exact number of formal mathematics classes taken by the man who built the absolute foundation of modern theoretical physics. Let that sink in for a second. In a field that is completely dominated today by advanced calculus and crazy abstract equations, Michael Faraday had virtually no formal mathematical training. None. Instead, he relied entirely on this incredibly powerful visual and spatial imagination to figure out how physics worked, and he backed it up with a relentless, rigorous discipline of empirical observation.
And when you look at his timeline, his ascent against the odds was just incredibly rapid. Born in 1791, his early life was defined by intense deprivation. We're talking about a hungry kid who, during times of famine, was rationed just a single loaf of bread to last him a whole week. But his trajectory completely flipped in 1805 when he became an apprentice to a London bookbinder. Being surrounded by all these Enlightenment texts, he basically started a self-taught education, absorbing everything he was binding. By 1813, he had completely transformed himself from a working-class apprentice into a practicing scientist.
So how does a bookbinder break into the elite scientific establishment? Well, his entry is an absolute masterclass in seizing an opportunity. A customer actually gifted the young apprentice some tickets to see Sir Humphrey Davy, who was the rockstar chemist of the day, deliver lectures at the Royal Institution. Faraday took meticulous notes, bound them beautifully in leather into this massive 300-page volume, and handed them to Davy as an undeniable plea for a job. And it worked. When an explosion temporarily blinded Davy shortly after, he remembered that earnest young bookbinder and hired Faraday on the spot.
All right, let's move into Section 1. The spark of genius, from bottle washer to scientific titan. So our young apprentice takes this self-taught education and just starts churning out paradigm-shifting discoveries. Faraday literally rose from being a bottle washer who actually had to travel Europe as a valet for Davy's wife because of strict class rules to a titan who completely dismantled 19th century physics. In just 10 years, he changed human history. In 1821, he achieved electromagnetic rotation. That's essentially the world's very first electric motor. 4 years later, flexing his chemistry muscles, he discovered benzene, which is a foundational building block in organic chemistry.
But his absolute crowning achievement, that arrived in 1831 with the discovery of electromagnetic induction. He proved that a changing magnetic field actually produces an electric field. And why does this matter to you? Well, because this exact principle is the basis for all modern electrical power generation. Literally, every electrical grid, every motor, and the smartphone you're probably holding right now traces its lineage straight back to Faraday wrapping insulated wire around an iron ring in a dingy basement lab. And he didn't stop there. He fundamentally reimagined the fabric of the universe. We can clearly contrast the old Newtonian view with Faraday's. Isaac Newton believed in action at a distance, this idea that forces like gravity just jump instantly across an empty vacuum. But Faraday, he said no, space isn't empty. He envisioned lines of force, tangible physical fields continuously permeating space in real time. It was a massive paradigm shift. In fact, Albert Einstein respected Faraday so much that he kept a framed portrait of him on his study wall, knowing Faraday's field concept made relativity and quantum mechanics possible.
Which brings us to Section 2. The lexicon and the law, formulating the language of chemistry.
As Faraday's experiments in electrochemistry expanded, he hit a really practical roadblock. The existing scientific vocabulary was completely inadequate to describe what he was discovering without implying old, incorrect assumptions. And realizing he lacked a fancy classical education, he didn't let ego get in the way. He teamed up with Cambridge polymath William Whewell to fix it. By combining Greek roots, they invented words that are universal today. The upward way became the anode, the downward way became the cathode, and the particles wandering around, they coined the term ion. Together, they literally wrote the dictionary for modern chemistry and physics.
Now let's look at Section 3, the civic scientist, championing public safety and health. You see, Faraday wasn't just locked away in a basement lab geeking out on theoretical physics. He viewed public service as an absolute moral imperative. He believed science should tangibly make human life better. Just look at his role after the horrific 1844 Haswell colliery disaster, where 95 men and boys were killed in a mine explosion. He went down into the disaster site and conclusively proved that while methane sparked it, the omnipresent airborne coal dust was the true explosive fuel. He begged for dust suppression. Tragically, the mine owners ignored his life-saving proof to save money, costing lives for another 60 years until his rules finally became law.
He also went to bat for public health in London. By the 1850s, the River Thames was basically a giant open sewer, triggering these lethal cholera epidemics. Faraday was out there dropping pieces of white cardstock into the river to measure how filthy it was. Outraged, he wrote this blistering public letter to the Times, warning, "If we neglect this subject, we cannot expect to do so with impunity." And he was spot on. His warning presaged the famous Great Stink of 1858, which was so awful it finally forced Parliament to build London's modern sewer system, wiping out cholera.
Moving right along to Section 4, Debunking Victorian Pseudoscience, Exposing the Mechanics of the Seance. So, mid-19th century society had developed this really dangerous obsession with spiritualism, particularly seance table turning, where people swore spirits were moving furniture. Faraday was deeply skeptical of anything breaking the laws of mechanics, so he rigged up this super elegant apparatus made of glass rollers and rubber bands to test it, and he conclusively proved it wasn't ghosts, it was the participants' own hands. Honest, intelligent people were subconsciously pushing the tables based on what they expected to happen. He beautifully demonstrated the ideomotor effect, which totally changed how we understand subconscious human behavior.
Finally, Section 5, Faith, Philosophy, and Legacy, the Unity of Nature.
To really understand how he navigated an intense midlife cognitive decline and kept his mind-blowing humility, we have to talk about his faith. Faraday was a devout Sandemanian, which was a strict Christian sect. Believing in a single creator gave him this unshakable conviction that all forces in nature, electricity, magnetism, light, had to be unified. That theological belief drove his science. It also gave him a rock-solid ethical compass. I mean, he point-blank refused to develop chemical weapons for the Crimean War on moral grounds. He rejected a knighthood because he hated vanity, and he insisted on being buried under a simple, plain headstone. So what's the big takeaway for us today? If you want an incredibly actionable lesson for your own professional development, just look at his legendary three-step maxim: work, finish, publish. Faraday knew that having a genius idea is basically useless without execution. And execution? Well, that doesn't mean a thing until you actually finish the project and put it out there publicly to be scrutinized and to benefit everyone else. This profound quote right here perfectly captures his entire scientific mindset. To Faraday, science was never a vanity project. It wasn't a tool for personal glory or wealth. It was a deeply reverent process of discovering objective, interconnected truths about the universe. He completely detached his own ego from his findings, seeing himself as just a humble observer of nature's laws.
And that brings us to the ultimate question for you. Knowing that the entire technological infrastructure of the 21st century traces straight back to this self-taught, impoverished bookbinder who just refused to accept things blindly, how might you harness his disciplined curiosity in your own life? Take a look at the systems around you. What invisible forces are just waiting for you to discover them? Keep observing, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.